My name is Stella Garber, and I'm the head of marketing for Trello. I am based in Chicago, and I have been at Trello for over 4 years, so that's practically a dinosaur in startup years. But you might be surprised or not surprised to learn that the Trello team is 70% remotely distributed. And some other fun stats that you may or may not have heard before, but I think are interesting because some stats about you, the Trello's user base, and us, the Trello team internally, are mirrored in each other. So for example, Trello, when I joined, we had about 4 million registered users, and like Michael mentioned earlier, we have about 35 million now. And our team has grown a bunch. When I joined, we were about 15 people, and now there are over 150 people globally working on Trello. Just as Trello is available in 21 different languages around the world, we've got Trellists all over the world, and we're super excited to continue to grow with our Atlassian acquisition. So you're probably wondering, why remote? Most people work in an office, but more and more people are starting to think about working remotely and really understanding that being in one geographic location isn't super scalable. But our story, similar to a lot of other companies, begins with a single talented person, Brett Kiefer, who is a developer for Trello. He had the opportunity to move to Hawaii with his family for work, and we thought, instead of losing a super talented engineer, does it really matter from the location where he's shipping the code? He moved to Hawaii, it worked out well, and then we started growing as a team. And most importantly, for a tool like Trello, people are using Trello to communicate with each other, to manage projects, and we are using Trello for the same thing internally. We're using it as a small team, and we experience the pains and requests that our customers are making because we're using Trello the exact same way. There are a lot of benefits for remote work. Probably one of the biggest ones is that you remove a lot of barriers with hiring. When everyone doesn't need to be in the same city, you can literally hire the smartest people no matter where they are. So actually, an example of this, you can see our company Who's Who board, which we totally stole this idea from Typeform. They had it first. And you can see sort of the diversity of people that we have. You can see all of that on the Trello board anytime. We also have a very results-oriented culture, which I think is key. You want to have a results-oriented culture. You don't want to have a culture where people are sticking around until 10 o'clock. I think I saw a stat recently that the average person only works something like 2 to 3 hours a day. Like, what's the point? Why are we wasting our lives sitting in an office? If you have a culture where people are tracking towards metrics or something that you can measure or see, then it becomes a much healthier environment. And so we have a company overview board where we're tracking all the different teams, what the priorities are, we're doing weekly updates that everybody has access to. And so we can see how we're tracking towards this quarter's goals or the annual company goals. By the way, this board, and I think most of these boards, are available on our inspiration page, trello.com/inspiration, so you're welcome to take a look. There's also a lot of research that shows that remote work promotes happiness and a higher level of productivity because, people can optimize where they're working, the times that they're working, and be much more productive. There's also a higher degree of loyalty because the basis for the work relationship is one around trust. And I think that as time goes on and more companies become open to the idea of remote work, we're going to see more studies like this. But, and this is really important, remote work isn't for everyone and it's not for every company. And you have to have some things in place before you even get started to make sure that a remote work experiment is successful. And the first thing is that you need organizational buy-in. Everybody needs to believe that remote work is important. And not just important, but that they're going to support it in ways that are either tools or culture-oriented. And I'll give some examples about that. You need the infrastructure. So this is really important also in places, when you're thinking about hiring people in places where maybe internet access isn't the most readily available. People need to be able to talk to each other, people need to be able to get work done, and the remote team needs to have the infrastructure to do whatever the kind of work is that they're doing. You need to have the tools in place to do that. And you also need a common set of rules for engagement. So for example, if people are, we have a rule at Trello that if you have 5 or 6 people or however many people, some of them are in an office, some of them are remote, you're always going to assume remote first, and everybody will take a call from their computer so that everybody is on the same page when it comes to the meeting. And I think that this really changes the dynamic for teams that are trying out remote work, because often it's one person on a video screen and everybody else is in a conference room and that person feels left out and it's just a terrible experience. So if you can do something like that, it's very powerful. So how do we do it? This talk is behind the scenes at Trello. So let me share with you some of our secret sauce, or not so secret sauce. So here are some of our remote working rules. Assume remote. And I gave you that example about the conference room. We always assume remote in any of our interactions or calls or meetings, etc. Every person who's working remotely needs to have a dedicated space that's either their office or a place that they go to. They can't just be working from their kitchen, because that's distracting. You can't really be working from a coffee shop all the time, because you're not gonna have that internet access or whatever it is, the concentration. So you need to have a dedicated space. Our rule is that it's a room with a door that closes, and you absolutely have to have dedicated childcare. I'm a mom. I know how difficult that is, but you can't fully concentrate if you don't have childcare. And because again, remote work is all about setting yourself up to be successful and productive. You need the proper tools. So at Trello, we pay for the remote work setup. We have chairs, we have the screens, those things that are all provided for by the company. Then, when you have all of those things, you need to make sure that you are over-communicating. And it's a funny thing, because people ask, like, how do you know when you're communicating enough? And the answer is you're probably not, and if you feel that you're over-communicating, you're probably doing it correctly. My role for my team is I tell everyone that if there's something important, you need to say it 3 times before people will remember it. So that's something that's super important for remote work, because you don't have that shared space where you run into someone in the hallway. And FaceTime is really important. We have an annual team offsite where we make those human-to-human relationships that we're not just an avatar that's in Slack or on Trello, that you actually get to know someone as a human. And then another really important thing, especially as you're working across time zones, and lots of different time zones, is to have a common overlap time where you can schedule things like meetings. Ours is 12 to 4 Eastern, because our office for Trello is located in New York, so that's just what we all decided. So here are some of the tools that we use. Not surprisingly, Trello's in there, but we also really rely on Slack. Zoom is a really big one for us, because whenever, a lot of times, if it's too complicated or chat isn't the right medium, we will always jump into a video meeting. And I really encourage that as a manager for the team to, if something takes more than a minute to explain, just jump into a Zoom. And then you might be surprised to learn that we actually only really use email for external communications. So we have all of the internal tools set up. We have Confluence that we're using for sharing news internally, or whatever it might be. Email is for partners, for customers, etc. So I'm on the marketing team, and I wanted to share with you some examples about how my team works. We've grown a lot, but our processes and our priorities have changed but we still maintain a focus on our fun, culture, knowing each other as people. So this is us when our first offsite that we had. You might recognize some of the folks in there. That's Brian in the middle, and Lauren, who spoke earlier today. And then this was at our last Trello together. You can see that we've grown a bunch, but we're still having a lot of fun. So taking an idea from an idea to execution. Not surprisingly, and again, I think this is the same process that happens in a physical space, but we just document it all because it's mostly happening over digital tools. We write down ideas on a Trello board. We meet, we pick the best ideas. In this case, let's use a blog post as an example. We write down the ideas on a Trello board. We get together. The content team has a monthly editorial meeting where they decide what the next month's content will be, and then we track the process from idea to done on a Trello board. And one of the cool things about this is that because we're working across time zones, a lot of times what will happen is Lauren might start her day in New York and she's writing a blog post and she needs editing, so she will put it into the editing column, and then Leah, who's on the Pacific time zone, will log in the morning and she already has a handful of blog posts that Lauren's passed off to her to edit that day. So that workflow works really well. And also, as our content team has grown, the way that we use Trello in our editorial calendar, which this is an early example, gets much more complex because now we're tracking where in the customer funnel we're using a label to denote what piece of content that is, or we're using a custom field to have more granular due dates on our Trello board. So the other thing that gets a bad rap is meetings. And I love meetings, but meetings have to be set up for success as well. So the first thing is that you have to have a meeting lead. How many of you have been in a meeting where there's just like awkward silence and no one really knows who's speaking next? Okay, well, I guess you're not in that many bad meetings, but I've definitely been in a bunch of bad meetings like that. So at our marketing meetings, we have someone who's designated as a meeting lead to make sure that things are moving along. And we have a board where we pick who the meeting lead is. It usually rotates. And then we also have an agenda that anyone can add to during the week, and we go through the list. So even before you attend a meeting, you know exactly what's going to be discussed. And then let's say you can't attend the meeting, you have everything on the Trello board so you can catch up later on and know what happened while you were away. There has to be that agenda because we're using Trello, we can all see it. We don't need to send it around. There's less work that needs to be done. You also have to make time for fun on a remote team. So we have these bi-weekly jam sessions where someone is leading some sort of a game or an icebreaker. Sometimes we'll grab a beer depending on what time it's going on. And that way you still keep up the fun even though you're not all in a physical space together. So this is an example of one of our we call them Mr. Rogers, where people across the company are paired up, and we just talk about whatever it is. I think in this one, Kate was sharing a thing that she had recently knit. And that way we're also having cross-company and cross-team collaboration. So just to share with you some of my 5 biggest takeaways for remote work. The first is that working from home is not remote work. And I think this is really important. If people at a company are working at home once a week or on a day when they don't have childcare, that's great, and it's awesome that you have the flexibility to do that. But it's not the same as setting a company up and the infrastructure and the common rules and all of the conversation around how to make remote work successful. And the reason why I mention this is because a lot of companies will say, oh, I tried remote work, but it didn't really work for our company. And then when I dig into it, I find out that it's really just like this one day a week policy or something like that. The tools are really important. Make sure that whatever the right tools are for your company, that you're getting them, and that everybody is sort of standardizing around the same set of tools for different types of communication. Make time for FaceTime. Humans need FaceTime. Make sure that if you're saving a bunch of money because you don't have an office, make sure to funnel that money into offsites or other fun things where people can connect with each other. Optimize your meetings. Meetings are inherently expensive, but I think when you have a remote meeting, you have a little bit more intentionality around why people are gathering into a Zoom. So make sure to follow those tips that I shared around making meetings more productive. Hire smart people, get shit done, repeat. That's sort of it. That's the secret sauce, you guys. Thank you very much.